So in the last videos, we found out that Jesus said to Simon and the other apostles, he said, let us go elsewhere. Let's get away from Capernaum and go to the other villages, the surrounding villages in Galilee. And so that was where Jesus spent most of his time in his whole life. He arrived in Nazareth, I don't know what age, probably about 3 or 4 years old, maybe a little bit older, 5. And then he grew up there until about 30. Then he started going out and he hung out mainly in Galilee. He also went to Judea, the southern part, if you remember. We have Samaria. He went to there for a little bit. He did Galilee, especially the northern part of Israel. And it says here, that is why I have come. That's the purpose of his coming. That's why he came. God sent him so that he could share with primarily the Jewish people. First of all, God loves Gentiles. There's 2 types of people in the world, Jews and Gentiles. Now there's 3, that's Christians, biblically speaking. And but Jews and Gentiles. And so we're going to study just for a little bit Galilee. Interesting information. And I love to know all about it, because wow, what was it like for Jesus in his time when he was a human on earth? So he said, let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages so we can preach here also. That is why I've come. Now, the next verse says this in Mark 1. So he traveled throughout Galilee. He went all through the Galilee, particularly, by the way, the lower Galilee. There's a lower and there's an upper. Upper is almost all rock. There's a lot of mountainous areas. There are some villages, but not many. So it's really lower Galilee is where he spent most of his time. He traveled throughout Galilee. Now, how long this happened, we don't know. It could have been weeks, could have been months. And then he, of course, went down to the southern part to Judea. Then he came back up to Galilee a lot. When he was resurrected from the dead, he said, meet me in Galilee. Do you remember Matthew? In Matthew, he said that. It says, so he traveled throughout Galilee. And Mark decides to just kind of highlight 2 things that he mainly did. Obviously, he did a lot of healings. He didn't mention this in this particular passage, although he has a lot of healings recorded in here. But he said he went around preaching in their synagogues. That's the Jewish church. It's called synagogue, meaning assembly, gathering. A get-together, a place of an assembled group where they came to worship and learn about God. And driving out, he casts out demons. So he mentions that as a significant part of the ministry of Jesus. He was kicking Satan out, kicking him out, driving him nuts. Get out of her, get out of him, kicking Satan out of those regions. Very powerful. But I like that he did mainly 2 things. He taught and preached, and he had action. So it was speech and speaking, and he also had deeds. And that's the Christian life, by the way. You're not just talk, it's your walk. It's action. And he gave devil the trouble. He gave the devil trouble. He gave him trouble, which I think is the job of a Christian. That we ought to be the same way, especially when Christ comes into you. He wants to kick Satan out of your life. He wants to kick Satan and demon powers out of your home. He wants to kick demons out of your family, out of your extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, and all. He wants to kick Satan out of the neighbors out of your life around you. He wants to kick Satan out of the community or neighborhood, out of the state or region that you live in. And that was a region. Galilee was his region. And he was kicking his bottom, just driving him out right and left. Yeah, I love it. And he also wants to kick him out of your school with your power of prayer and helping people. So let's talk about Galilee for a second. This is what it was like in the time of Jesus. So, oh, look at all this, Gordon. I'll be quick. Fascinating stuff. Stay with me. Here is Galilee. This whole thing, well, I didn't draw all of Israel, but this is the northern part of Israel on a map. And so this, all these lines, these hyphenated lines right here, hyphened lines is Galilee right here. And so at the beginning, I like to say in the Old Testament, Galilee is mentioned. It's called the Galilee of the Gentiles, for example. And the word Galilee, by the way, means basically circular, circle, cylinder, rod. So it's different meanings there, but that's kind of what we think the word means, Galilee. It's sort of a circle of people here. And especially Gentiles, as we said, but we'll get into that a little bit. In the Old Testament, there were 4 tribes out of the 12 that were put up in that area. And I like the acronyms NAS, Naphtali, Asher, Issachar, and Zebulun. Those are the ones that are up in this area. Somewhat of Asher, not as much, but half of it or whatever, some. Galilee was a rural area, not real urban like cities, not big cities and all. Little towns, a lot of villages and all. Some had a lot of people. Josephus exaggerated, I think, probably. He said there were like 10 to 15,000 people in each village. I don't know, maybe he's right, but that's a lot more than probably it really was. But either way, it was more of a country, like out in the country, rural area. Lots of trees and pastures, lots and lots of farmlands. Agrarian, agriculture, farmers everywhere. Farmlands were everywhere. Which, by the way, we'll find out later on that, where is it? Oh, it's right here, fertile, yeah. Fertile soil. It was great for planting crops. Lots and lots of crops, very fertile. That's what that means. It was good soil all over the place. Well, really, especially lower Galilee. Upper Galilee was right about here, and all this right up here, where these words are. Down here is lower Galilee. This is where, it was really great farmlands and all. And there was some farming here and there and shepherding and things like that up there. Anyway, 60 miles by 30 to 35 miles diameter. So it wasn't that large of a region, really. Wasn't that big. Okay. Maybe 150,000 people total. Now, I better put a big question mark there because that's a modern estimate. There could have been a lot more, I think I remember, if I could remember everything I've read over the years, I think there's 1 million people that were in Israel total, but that sounds pretty high to me. Or maybe it was 1 million people total in the world at that time. I can't remember, but I think that's a little high. But in the Galilean area, it was about 150,000 people maybe. Yeah, it can't be 1 million, I don't think. Well, I'm talking about all of Israel, but I'm not sure. Mainly Gentiles. A lot of Gentile people that were not children of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. With lots of Jews. Still, there were a lot of Jews there. And when he preached, he went to their synagogues. That's Jewish people. Now, there were Gentiles who came to the synagogues. They were called the righteous of the nations and the God-fearers. These are people who loved Yahweh, loved Jehovah, loved God, the God of the Jews, the true and only God, by the way. Mainly Gentiles were there, but still lots of Jews were scattered throughout. The majority were peasants, kind of poorer people. They weren't really very rich. Some people were. Some definitely were rich in that area, just like nowadays. But a lot of more peasants and farmers who just were trying to make a living. Okay, a lot of working people. Villages close to each other. They were pretty close. 204 is what estimated. Over 200 villages were pretty close to each other. There's an upper and lower, I mentioned that. All references except one was in the lower. And I'm not sure which one that was, where he was in the upper, up in this area. And by the way, I remember also studying and finding out the boundary. I'm not sure exactly where the boundary is here. Over here is to the coastlands. I don't know if it went all the way over here to the Mediterranean Sea, the Great Sea. It went to the coastlands. Down here is Jezreel, the Valley of Jezreel. Over here is Jordan River here. And then up in here, it's kind of not clear there. It wasn't way up there. And maybe the time that he went up north was actually in Tyre and Sidon that it was mentioned. Maybe that's what it's referring to, the scholar there. So all the Bible references seem to be, except for one, was a lower Galilee region. The highest point was way up here, and it was a mountain called Mount Meron. And it was 4,000 feet. It's the highest point in Israel, by the way. Like Jerusalem was like 2,000 feet and, 2,500 and all their mountains. This is 4,000 feet. So this is definitely rocky and mountainous up in here. And by the way, one of the major things that's very important to the Bible here and in that time was it was looked down on by the Judeans, the people from Judea, way down here. Now, that's not everyone. A lot of times we do this kind of big, broad stroke big statement like they didn't like him. Not all of them. I'm sure there were great relationships between some of them. But especially from the religious people, the Pharisees, of course there are Pharisees up in Galilee too, but the Sanhedrin and Sadducees, which were more south in Judea, they really looked up at those other fellow Jews, their brothers up there, and they looked kind of down on them. They didn't think they were as good. I think some of the reasons because the Galileans had some sort of accent. They couldn't say the words quite correctly. So, people have a prejudice against people because of this or that, maybe their looks or what they wear, or something about their accent, their language, and they couldn't say certain letters as well and all. That's one reason. Plus, I believe that down below, many of them probably kept the law more rigidly, legal, like just this and that, and all these rules on top of rules on top of rules on top of rules. And the Galileans were good people, I believe, as a rule, good Jewish people, but they weren't as strict on a lot of things. Strict is good, by the way. If I were living and if I didn't know Jesus and I would lived in that time, I would have probably been more like a Pharisee. Now, I've talked about Pharisees for a long time in the Bible. Jesus talked about Pharisees, and they were all looked down upon by Jesus, or most of them, not true. But a lot of the things they were wrong. Hopefully I wouldn't be like that. No, I don't think so. But there's a lot of things in the Pharisees I really like. But again, it seems like the Judean people, what they believe, see, it's what Pharisees believed is what I like. A lot of the same stuff. And Jesus actually agreed with a lot of the things they said. They just didn't keep it, and they weren't right, and their hearts weren't right. So anyway, so there's Galilee for you. So he went and traveled throughout the villages in Galilee, most likely down in this area right here. So I'm going to erase that and kind of all this work here that I just put in here to this. And so here, all this, see if I can get this. So he traveled down in this lower region, and he really traveled from village to village to town to town to city. No major cities, more rural, not urban. But he went here. He left Capernaum, and maybe he went up here for a little bit, and then he went city to city. There's a bunch of them around here. I don't know how many. I can't remember. 15 or something major cities. And then and then he went village, all over the place. And he started traveling all over the lower region here of Galilee. So he did all this area, basically, something like that. So that kind of gives you an idea where he went and what he did throughout. Now, this last statement of that we're reading here, when it says he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons, it was in that area, but it was kind of a quick note that that's where he was, and he went there. And I think that's significant for the reasons that I mentioned, that they were looked down on, and yet Jesus went to them. He tends to go to the underdogs. He tends to go to people who are more open to him, which in the Judean area, especially near the temple and all that area, they weren't that open to Jesus. They didn't like him. They were jealous of him, and they didn't like how kind and loving he was to everybody. Sinners, they called him, and all that. So these upper Galilee, in the Galilee region, they were looked down upon, and especially because they weren't scholars and schooled in the Jerusalem temple, professor type scholarly people. They're good, hard-working men and women and farmers and poor peasants, a lot of them. That's who Jesus shared the kingdom message to primarily. Amen. So I hope you got something out of that. I enjoyed sharing. God bless you.